The house at 247 Maple Street looked like the epitome of the American dream. The two-story red brick building with white shutters and a neatly trimmed lawn was Joseph Connor's pride and joy. Every morning, on his way to work at his construction company, Connor's Construction, he looked with satisfaction at the result of 20 years of hard work. On Monday, a week before the wedding, the atmosphere in the house was tense, but it seemed like natural pre-wedding excitement. Helena Connors bustled around the house from morning to night, checking guest lists, calling the florist, and reworking the seating plan for the 10th time. "Joe, remember to pick up the tuxedo from the dry cleaners tomorrow?" she called to her husband, who was reading the local newspaper, the Baker Daily, at the kitchen table. Joseph looked up from an article about a new shopping center that was going to be built on the outskirts of town. At 48, he still looked like a man who could spend all day on a construction site and then dance at his daughter's wedding in the evening. Broad shoulders, strong arms, only the gray hair at his temples betrayed his age. "Of course I remember. And the ushers' costumes are ready too," he replied, folding the newspaper. "Hell, maybe you should relax a little. Everything is going according to plan." Helena stopped in the middle of the kitchen, holding a list of tasks for the day in her hands. At 45, she had retained her attractiveness, although in recent years, wrinkles of fatigue had appeared on her face. Working as an administrator at State Fire Insurance was not her lifelong dream, but it provided a stable income for her family. "Relax?" She shook her head. "We have a wedding for 200 people in a week, Joe. If something goes wrong..." "Nothing will go wrong," Joseph said firmly, approaching his wife and putting his arms around her shoulders. "Our Josie will have her fairy tale wedding, and Brad, well, he's a good guy. He'll make her happy." Helena tensed in his embrace. In 22 years of marriage, she had learned to read her husband's intonations, and something in his voice seemed insincere to her. It was as if he was trying to convince himself rather than her. "You love Brad," she said, turning to face him. "Don't you?" Joseph hesitated before answering, and that moment of hesitation was enough. "Of course," he finally said. "He makes Josie happy. That's what matters." At that moment, Josephine herself burst into the kitchen, full of energy as always. Even in simple jeans and a t-shirt, she moved with the grace of a professional dancer. Her dark hair was pulled back into a casual bun, and her eyes sparkled with excitement. "Mom, Dad! Brad said his parents are coming tomorrow night," she announced. "How about we have a family dinner? You know, so everyone can get to know each other better?" Helena and Joseph exchanged glances. Brad's parents, Frank and Doris Miller from Toledo, were simple but proud people. Frank worked as a foreman at the Ford factory, and Doris was a cashier at a supermarket. Their relationship with the Connors family was polite, but nothing more. "Great idea, sweetheart," Joseph said, kissing his daughter on the top of her head. "Mom will make something special." "Where's Brad now?" Helena asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "At the car dealership working," Josephine replied. "He has an important meeting with a client today, but he said he'll try to finish early and stop by." Joseph frowned. Brad Miller worked as a sales manager at Premium Auto on Baker's Main Street. It was a good job, but Joseph felt that the young man took it too lightly. Too often he finished early, too often took weekends off, too easily spent money. "Okay," was all he said. Josephine didn't notice the tension in her father's voice. She was in love, and the world seemed wonderful to her. At 24, she was full of hopes and plans. The Baker Stars Ballroom Dance Studio, where she worked with children aged 5 to 14, didn't bring in much money, but it brought her enormous pleasure. And after her wedding to Brad, she could think about her own studio, about children, about the future. "By the way, Mom, do you remember the dance rehearsal for the newlyweds?" Josephine asked. "Brad wants to surprise the guests. We're learning the waltz." Helena smiled, and for the first time that day, it was a genuine smile. "Can you teach him to dance in a week?" "Do you doubt your daughter?" Josephine laughed. "I'm a professional." In the evening, when Josephine left for the studio for evening classes with a group of teenagers, and Joseph stayed behind at the construction site, Helena was left home alone. She sat in the living room, sorting through wedding invitations, and thinking about how quickly time flies. Just yesterday, it seemed, Josie was a little girl dancing barefoot around the house to music from an old tape recorder. And now she was marrying a man she had known for only a year and a half. Helena met Brad Miller at her colleague's birthday party. He was charming, attentive, and knew how to tell interesting stories. Josie fell in love with him at first sight, and Brad seemed to reciprocate her feelings. He proposed a year after they met, and the wedding was set for the summer. But something about their relationship bothered Helena. Maybe it was the way Brad sometimes looked at other women, or how easily he made promises that he then forgot to keep, or how he could charm anyone, including her. Helena got up from the sofa and walked over to the window. Twilight was falling outside, and the streetlights were coming on. Neighbors were watering their lawns, children were playing ball in their yards, and somewhere a dog was barking. It was the ordinary American idol she had once dreamed of, but now that idol seemed as fragile as a glass toy that could be broken by a careless touch. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Helena opened the door and saw Brad standing on the threshold with a bouquet of flowers and his characteristic smile. "Hi, Hel," he said, using a nickname that hurt her ears. Only Joseph had the right to call her that. "Is Josie home?" "She's at the studio," Helena replied, involuntarily admiring his appearance. At 28, Brad was the epitome of male attractiveness. Tall, athletic, with piercing blue eyes and blonde hair. He knew how to dress, how to talk, how to make people like him. "That's too bad," he said, but he didn't seem upset. "How about keeping me company? We so rarely get to talk alone." Helena felt something stir inside her. It was wrong, she knew that. But in recent months, she had felt invisible in her own home. Joseph was always working, Josie was busy preparing for her wedding, and she was just existing between work and household chores. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "Coffee? I'd love some," Brad replied, walking into the house as if it were his own. Saturday, July 15th, began at the Connors house at 5 in the morning. Helena woke up to the sound of the alarm clock and immediately felt her heart pound with excitement. Wedding day. The day they had been preparing for 6 months had finally arrived. Joseph was still asleep, his arms spread out across the bed. Helena quietly got up, put on her robe, and went down to the kitchen. It was already light outside, and she saw that the sky was clear. There would be no rain. The first stroke of luck of the day. She turned on the coffee maker and took the sandwiches she had prepared the night before out of the refrigerator for breakfast. Today, no one should go hungry or get nervous over trifles. The day's schedule was planned down to the minute. The makeup artist and hairdresser would arrive at 9, the photographer at 11, departure for the church at 1, the wedding ceremony at 3, and the reception at the Grand Baker Hotel at 4. "Mom, are you up yet?" Josephine's sleepy voice could be heard. She was coming down the stairs in her ballerina pajamas, a gift from her teenage years. "Sweetheart, how did you sleep?" Helena hugged her daughter, inhaling the familiar scent of her apple-scented shampoo. "I hardly slept," Josephine admitted. "I kept thinking I had forgotten something. And then I had a nightmare that I was late for church and all the guests had left." Helena laughed, though her heart ached with tenderness. Her little girl was getting married today. No one is going anywhere. Today is your day and everything will go perfectly. Half an hour later, Joseph woke up. He came down to the kitchen already dressed in his work jeans and plaid shirt. "Where are you going?" Helena asked in surprise. "To the construction site to quickly check how things are going," he replied, pouring coffee into a thermos mug. "The workers promised to finish the foundation by Monday." "Joe, today is your only daughter's wedding!" Helena exclaimed indignantly. "That's exactly why I need to make sure everything is under control," he replied calmly. "I'll be back by 10, I'll have time to get myself ready." Josephine looked at her father with understanding. She knew that work was a way for him to cope with stress, and today he was just as nervous as she was. "Okay, Dad. But by 11, you have to be here in a tuxedo and with a smile." Joseph kissed his daughter on the forehead. "I promise, Princess." After he left, controlled chaos ensued in the house. The stylists arrived, a young, energetic woman named Christina, and an elderly hairdresser named Frank, who had been doing Baker's bride's hair for the past 20 years. Next came the bridesmaids, Emma, Josephine's friend from school, now working as a nurse, and Rachel, a colleague from the dance studio. The house was filled with women's laughter, the sound of hair dryers, and the smell of hairspray. Helena bustled between the living room, where Josephine was being pampered, and the kitchen, where she was preparing snacks for the whole company. At 9:30, her cell phone rang. Helena saw Brad's name on the screen and felt something stir inside her. "Hello? Hi, Hel." His voice sounded tense. "Can I talk to Josie? She's busy at the hairdresser's." "Is something wrong?" "No, everything's fine. I just wanted to hear her voice." Helena went out onto the porch to talk away from prying ears. "Brad, are you nervous?" "A little." He paused. "Are you?" The question caught her off guard. There was something in his tone that was too personal, too intimate for a conversation with his future mother-in-law. "I'm worried about Josie," she replied cautiously. "There's no need to worry about her. She's the most beautiful woman in the world," he said, but then added more quietly, "although beauty clearly runs in the family." Helena felt her face flush. It was definitely an inappropriate remark. "Brad, sorry, I didn't mean to say that," he said quickly. "I'm just nervous. See you at the church." He hung up, leaving Helena standing on the porch with the phone in her hand and her heart pounding wildly. At exactly 10 o'clock, Joseph returned home as promised. Helena met him in the hallway. "How's the construction going?" she asked, trying to sound normal. "Everything's going according to plan," he replied, but his gaze lingered on her face. "You look good. Is that a new dress?" Helena looked down at herself. She was wearing the turquoise dress she had bought especially for the wedding. It flattered her figure and made her look younger. "Remember I showed it to you a month ago?" "Yes, of course," he said, although it was clear he didn't remember. "Very pretty. Is Josie ready?" "Almost. She just needs to put on her dress." The next hour flew by in a blur. Josephine looked like a fairy tale princess in her wedding dress. White silk flowed from her waist to the floor, lace framed her neckline, and her veil was adorned with pearls that had belonged to Josephine's grandmother. "My God," Helena whispered as her daughter descended the stairs. "You're beautiful." Joseph stood in the hall in a tuxedo, tears glistening in his eyes. "My girl," he said hoarsely, "how you've grown." The photographer captured every moment. Josephine with her parents, with her friends, alone by the living room window. Then the cars arrived, a white limousine for the bride and her friends, and a black Cadillac for her parents. St. Patrick's Church was filled to capacity. Helena nodded to her acquaintances as she made her way to the front row. Neighbors, Joseph's colleagues, her co-workers from the insurance company, family friends. Everyone was smiling. Everyone wished the young couple happiness. Brad stood at the altar in a black tuxedo, and Helena couldn't help but admire him. He was truly handsome, tall, stately, with regular features. Standing next to him was his friend Mike, the groom's best man, a manager at the same car dealership. When the wedding march began and Josephine appeared at the church door on her father's arm, all the guests stood up. Helena looked at her daughter and felt pride, joy, and sadness at the same time. In a few minutes, Josie would no longer belong only to them. The ceremony went perfectly. Father Mackenzie gave a touching speech about love and fidelity. The bride and groom exchanged rings and vows, and when Brad kissed the bride, the whole church burst into applause. I now pronounce you husband and wife," the priest solemnly proclaimed. Helena cried, not hiding her tears. Joseph squeezed her hand tightly, and she felt that he was also struggling with his emotions. After the ceremony, there were photos on the steps, congratulations from guests, rice and rose petals. The newlyweds were beaming with happiness, and even Helena forgot her doubts for a moment. By 4 o'clock, the whole party had gathered in the banquet hall of the Grand Baker Hotel, the only 4-star hotel in town. The hall was decorated with white and pink flowers, the tables were set with the finest china, and the orchestra was already tuning their instruments. Helena and Joseph sat at the head table next to the newlyweds. To their right were Brad's parents, Frank and Doris Miller. Frank, a strong man with calloused hands, looked uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo. Doris, on the other hand, looked excited and happy in her best dress. "What a beautiful wedding," she said to Helena. "You put so much effort into organizing it." "We'll do anything for Josie," Helena replied, watching her daughter laugh at her husband's joke. The toasts began immediately after the salads were served. Joseph was the first to stand up, a little nervous in front of the microphone. "Dear guests," he began, "today is a special day for our family. My little girl has become a wife. Josie, you have always been our joy and pride, and now Brad will share that joy with us." He turned to his son-in-law, and something elusive flashed in his eyes. "Brad, you have received the most precious gift, our daughter's heart. Cherish it. We entrust you with the most precious thing we have." Applause filled the hall. Brad stood up, raised his glass, and replied, "Joe, Helena, thank you for giving Josephine to the world. I promise to make her happy. And," he turned to Helena, and their eyes met, "thank you for accepting me into your family." Something in his gaze made Helena lower her eyes. Joseph, sitting next to her, frowned but said nothing. After dinner, the dancing began. The newlyweds' first dance went flawlessly. All those hours of practice with Josephine had paid off. Brad led her across the dance floor with ease and confidence, and the guests watched the beautiful couple with admiration. Then the parents joined the dance. Joseph invited his daughter, and Brad invited Helena. When he held out his hand to her, she hesitated for a second. "It would be my pleasure," he said with a smile. Helena let him lead her onto the dance floor. Brad danced as well as he did with Josephine, holding her waist firmly and leading her confidently and gracefully. Helena felt the guests' eyes on her and tried to smile, but her heart was beating too fast. "You're a wonderful dancer," she said to fill the silence. "I have a good teacher in my family," he replied. "By the way, you look especially beautiful today. This dress brings out the color of your eyes. Brad, you shouldn't." "Shouldn't what? Pay compliments?" But it's true. He leaned closer, and Helena smelled his cologne, felt the warmth of his breath. "Sometimes I think I met the wrong woman from the Connors family," he whispered in her ear. Helena's legs buckled. She tried to pull away, but he held her tight. "This isn't right," she whispered. "Many things that are right seem wrong," he replied. The dance ended, and Helena hurried away from Brad, feeling her cheeks burn. She looked back and saw Joseph standing by the wall with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was looking at her, and there was something new in his eyes: suspicion. The banquet at the Grand Baker Hotel was in full swing. It was 6:30 in the evening. The guests had already relaxed after the formal part. The orchestra was playing popular tunes, and the dance floor was filled with couples of all ages. Josephine was radiant in her wedding dress, moving from table to table, thanking the guests for their congratulations. Helena stood by the window of the banquet hall, holding a glass of champagne and watching the festivities. After dancing with Brad, she felt uncomfortable, as if everyone around her could read her thoughts. His words still rang in her ears. "Sometimes I think I met the wrong woman from the Connors family." "Helena, dear, what a wonderful wedding." Mrs. Wilson, a neighbor and friend of the family for many years, approached her. "Josie looks like a princess. And Brad is such a handsome young man. Thank you, Margaret. Helena smiled, trying to focus on the conversation. We are very happy for them. And how are you? Aren't you sad to let your only daughter go? Helena looked at Josephine, who was dancing with Brad's grandfather, 80-year-old Albert Miller, who had come from Detroit especially for the wedding. Of course I'm sad. But she's happy, and that's what matters. Mrs. Wilson nodded and walked away to the buffet table. Helena was left alone with her thoughts again. She looked around for her husband and saw Joseph at a table with colleagues from the construction company. They were discussing some project, and it was clear from her husband's face that he was trying not to think about what was going on around him. In 22 years of marriage, Helena had learned to read his moods. Right now, he was tense, but not with joy for his daughter, but with something else. He glanced sideways at her several times, and his gaze betrayed his anxiety. Are you bored being alone? Brad's voice made her start. He had approached unnoticed, holding a glass of whiskey in his hand. Just relaxing, she replied without turning to him. Where's Josie? Dancing with your father. They're discussing some story from her childhood. Brad stood next to her, and Helena felt the warmth of his body. Listen, about what I said during the dance. Let's just forget about it, she quickly interrupted. What if I don't want to forget? Helena turned to him, ready to reprimand him, but the words stuck in her throat. Brad was looking at her so intensely that it took her breath away. Brad, you married my daughter 2 hours ago, she whispered. I know. And it was a mistake. What are you saying? Helena looked around, checking to see if anyone could hear them. I'm telling the truth. I realized it that night when I came to your house a week ago, and Josie wasn't there. We were sitting in the kitchen. You were talking about your work, laughing at my jokes, and I suddenly realized that all this time I had been falling in love with the wrong woman. Helena felt the world swaying beneath her feet. This was madness, complete madness. Stop, she said. Stop right now. You're drunk. I'm perfectly sober. And I've never said anything more serious. He took a step closer. Helena, you feel the same way. I can see it in your eyes. She wanted to deny it, wanted to say he was crazy, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. Something in her responded to his presence, his gaze, his words. Something she had been diligently suppressing all these months. It's wrong, she repeated in a weak voice. I know, but I can't control it. At that moment, Josephine approached them, flushed from dancing and happy. What are you talking about so seriously? She asked, hugging her husband around the waist. Brad instantly transformed, his usual smile appearing on his face. We were discussing how beautiful my wife is, he said, kissing her on the cheek. And what a wonderful mother-in-law. Josephine laughed. Mom, did you know that Grandpa Miller worked in radio when he was young? He told such interesting stories. No, I didn't. Helena struggled to focus on her daughter's words. That's wonderful. By the way, there will be a bouquet dance soon. All unmarried girls should gather in the center of the hall, Josephine continued. Mom, will you help me with my veil? It keeps getting caught on my heels. Of course, sweetheart. Helena was relieved to have an excuse to leave. They headed for the ladies' room, which was on the second floor of the hotel. Josephine chattered all the way about the guests, the gifts, how wonderful her husband was. Mom, are you happy? She suddenly asked when they were alone in the elegant ladies' room with mirrors and soft armchairs. What kind of question is that? Of course I'm happy. Today is your day. No, that's not what I mean. Are you happy in general? In your marriage to Dad? Helena froze, holding a veil pin in her hands. Why do you ask? It's just that sometimes it seems to me that you and Dad live like roommates, not like husband and wife. You hardly talk or laugh together. Helena looked in the mirror and saw the reflection of her daughter, young, beautiful, full of hope. Josie, we've been together for over 20 years. Relationships change over time. but I don't want them to change. I want Brad and I to always be in love with each other, just like we are now." Helena closed her eyes, feeling her heart ache. "I want that too, dear." They returned to the hall just as the bouquet dance was about to begin. Josephine stood in the center, surrounded by 10 unmarried girls, including her friends and Brad's cousins. She turned her back to the crowd and threw the bouquet high into the air. Brad's 17-year-old cousin, Amy, caught the bouquet, prompting cheerful comments that she was too young to be thinking about marriage. The guests laughed, took pictures, and the orchestra played a slow melody for the next dance. Helena moved to the edge of the hall, feeling tired. It had been a long and emotionally intense day. She wanted to go home, to peace and quiet, away from this celebration, which was starting to feel more like torture. "Tired?" Joseph appeared beside her again. His face showed concern, but something else too. A little. "It's been a long day." "Yes, but everything went well. Josie is happy." They watched the dancing couples in silence for a while. Josephine was dancing with Brad's uncle, smiling and telling him something. "Hell," Joseph said quietly. "I need to talk to you." Something in his tone made her wary. "About what?" "Not here. Let's go upstairs." He took her by the hand and led her to the stairs. Helena wanted to protest, but she realized that the conversation was inevitable. They went up to the second floor, where there were several small meeting rooms that the hotel rented out for business meetings. Joseph opened the door to one of the rooms and let his wife go ahead. Inside were a table, several chairs, and a small sofa. The windows looked out onto the hotel's courtyard. "What's going on between you and Brad?" he asked, without preamble. Helena felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you talking about?" "I saw the way he looked at you. I saw you dancing. I saw you talking by the window." Joseph's voice was calm, but his eyes burned with fire. "Helena, we've known each other for 22 years. Don't lie to me." She turned away toward the window, unable to meet his gaze. "Nothing is going on." "But it could?" The question caught her off guard with its directness. "Joe, answer honestly." Helena closed her eyes. Everything was falling apart. Her carefully constructed life was crumbling to pieces. "I don't know," she whispered. Joseph was silent for so long that she turned to him. He was sitting on the sofa with his head in his hands. "God," he muttered, "on our daughter's wedding day." "Joe, nothing happened. He just says things he shouldn't say, and you listen to them." "I try to stop him." Joseph raised his head and looked at her. "Try? Or pretending to try?" Helena felt tears welling up in her throat. "I don't know. Honestly, I don't know." At that moment, the door to the room opened. Brad stood in the doorway with 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. When he saw them, he stopped dead in his tracks. "Sorry, I didn't know anyone was here," he said, but he didn't take a step back. Joseph slowly got up from the sofa. "What are you doing here, Brad?" "Looking for a quiet place to talk to one of the guests," he replied, but his gaze was fixed on Helena. "Which guest?" Brad hesitated before answering. "Your wife," he finally said. A heavy silence hung in the air. Helena stood by the window, unable to move. Joseph looked at his son-in-law, his expression changing from surprise to understanding, then to rage. "Leave," he said quietly. "Joe, listen. Leave. Now." "Before I do something stupid," Brad put the glasses on the table but did not leave. "I want Helena to make a choice," he said. "She has a right to happiness." "Happiness?" Joseph's voice rose. "You married my daughter 3 hours ago. It was a mistake." We all understand that Joseph took a step toward him, and Helena saw that her husband's hands were clenched into fists. "Joe, don't," she said. "Yes, listen to her," Brad added. "She doesn't want you to do something you'll regret." "Regret what?" Joseph stopped a few inches from his son-in-law. "You're seducing my wife on my daughter's wedding day. And you're talking to me about regrets. I wasn't seducing anyone. Helena is a grown woman. She can make her own decisions. Joseph swung at him, but Helena grabbed his arm. "Stop!" she shouted. "Both of you!" Downstairs, our daughter is celebrating the happiest day of her life, and you're ready to start a fight. The men froze, breathing heavily. "Helena," Brad said, "tell him the truth. Tell him how you feel." She looked at both of them, at the husband with whom she had spent more than half her life, and at the man who had turned her world upside down in a matter of days. "I feel," she began and stopped. "Yes?" Brad urged. "I feel like I'm going crazy," she said, and ran out of the room. Helena ran down the hallway to the stairs, not looking where she was going. Tears blurred her vision. Her heart pounded like crazy. She went down to the hall where the party was still going on, walked through the dancing couples to the exit, and rushed out into the fresh air. The summer evening was warm and quiet. Helena leaned against the hotel wall and closed her eyes, trying to pull herself together. What had she done? How could she have let things get this far? "Mom?" She opened her eyes and saw Josephine looking out of the hotel door. "Where have you been?" "Everyone's looking for you. They're about to cut the cake." "I'm coming, sweetie." Helena quickly wiped away her tears. "I just needed some air." "Were you crying? What happened?" "Nothing. Just emotions. It's such an important day." Josephine hugged her mother. "I love you so much, Mom. Thank you for making this day perfect." Helena held her daughter close, feeling her heart break into pieces. "I love you too, more than anything in the world." They returned to the hall, where everyone was already gathered around the three-tiered cake. Joseph and Brad stood on either side of the newlyweds, not looking at each other. Helena took her place, trying to smile and look like a happy mother of the bride. But inside, she was burning with pain. She knew that after tonight, nothing in their family would ever be the same again. 10 minutes after Helena left the meeting room, Joseph was still standing face to face with Brad. The air between them was charged with hatred and mutual contempt. Brad stood confidently, even arrogantly, as if the situation amused him. "You know what pisses me off the most about you?" Joseph asked quietly, looking his brother-in-law in the eye. "It's that you think you're entitled to everything. My daughter, my wife, my family." Brad smirked and took a sip from the glass he was still holding. "Rights are taken, Joe. They're not given." Those were the last words Brad Miller ever spoke. Joseph grabbed a heavy glass statuette from the desk, the Grand Baker Hotel's award for best service, and struck his brother-in-law hard on the head. There was a dull crunch, and Brad collapsed to the floor, dropping the glass. Champagne spilled onto the carpet, mixing with blood. Joseph stood over the body, breathing heavily. The statuette fell from his hands and rolled under the table. The room was deathly silent, broken only by the sounds of music and laughter coming from the banquet hall below. The reality of what was happening did not immediately sink in. At first, there was only deafening silence in his head. Then, slowly, the sounds, smells, and sensations began to return. The smell of blood, the unnatural position of the body on the floor, the open, unblinking eyes. Joseph crouched down and tried to feel Brad's pulse on his neck. Nothing. The skin was still warm, but life had already left this body. At the age of 30, the man's life ended in a hotel meeting room during his wife's wedding reception. Joseph's first thought was panic. What now? How to explain? What to say to Josephine? He had killed his daughter's husband 4 hours after the wedding. He had killed him in a fit of rage without thinking about the consequences. His second thought was relief. Brad would no longer be able to destroy his family, seduce Helena, or hurt Josephine. The problem was solved once and for all. His third thought was horror at the fact that he was capable of such a thing. Joseph got up from the floor and examined his clothes. There were a few drops of blood on his shirt cuff, but nothing noticeable on his tuxedo. He washed the blood off in a small sink in the corner of the room, tidied his hair, and adjusted his bow tie. Then he quietly left the room, locked the door from the inside, and went down to the banquet hall via the service staircase. No one noticed his return. The guests were dancing, the waiters were serving drinks, and the orchestra was playing popular tunes from the 70s. Josephine was standing at the main table, surrounded by her friends, laughing at something Brad's cousin was saying. She looked happy and carefree. Joseph felt a sharp pain in his chest at the thought that her happiness was coming to an end. "Dad? Where have you been?" Noticing him, she ran up and hugged him. "We've been looking for you." "And where's Brad?" "He disappeared half an hour ago." "I don't know, Princess," Joseph replied, surprised at how calm his voice sounded. "Maybe he's smoking with his friends?" "He doesn't smoke," Josephine frowned. "That's strange. They're about to serve coffee and dessert. He should be here." The next 20 minutes were spent searching for the groom. Brad's friends searched the men's room, the smoking room, and the hotel lobby. The young man's parents were worried. It was not like him to disappear during important events. "Maybe he's not feeling well?" suggested Doris Miller. "He sometimes gets migraines." Josephine decided to check the hotel rooms they had booked for their wedding night. The administrator gave her the key, and she went up to the 3rd floor accompanied by her friends. The room was empty. Helena stood apart from the commotion, watching the search for her daughter's husband. After the scene in the meeting room, she felt broken and empty. Joseph was also somewhere nearby, but they avoided eye contact. "Helena, have you seen Brad?" Mrs. Miller asked, approaching her with a worried look on her face. "No, I haven't," she replied truthfully. By 9:30, the concern had turned to panic. The disappearance of a groom on his wedding day was not just strange, it was impossible. The hotel manager called in security to help with the search. The guards began searching all the rooms, including the staff quarters. The body was found at 10:47 p.m. Security guard Tommy Grayson, a retired police officer who worked at the hotel on weekends, broke open the lock on conference room number 7 after noticing that the door was locked from the inside, even though the logbook indicated that the room should have been vacant. Brad was lying on the floor between the table and the sofa in a pool of dried blood. The figurine was lying under the table with clear traces of blood and hair on its surface. Grayson immediately called the police and an ambulance, then went down to the banquet hall to inform the manager of the discovery. The news spread like wildfire through the hall. Some people screamed, some cried, and several elderly guests felt ill. Josephine fainted when she was told that her husband had been found dead. Helena rushed to her daughter, while Joseph stood aside, watching the chaos he had created. The first patrol car arrived 8 minutes later. Officers Rodriguez and Jennifer Clark immediately cordoned off the crime scene and began evacuating guests from the hotel. 200 people in evening attire crowded into the lobby and parking lot, not understanding what had happened. Detective Sarah Thompson received the call at 11:15 p.m. as she was putting her 14-year-old son to bed. A murder during a wedding in Baker was unprecedented. She had never encountered anything like it in her entire career. Sarah arrived at the scene at 11:35 p.m. She was 39 years old and had been a detective for 12 years, the last 5 of which she had spent in the homicide division. Divorced, she was raising her son alone and lived in a small house 2 blocks from the police station. The crime scene investigation yielded the first clues. Brad Miller had been killed with a blunt object, a glass figurine that was lying next to the body. The blow had struck the left temple and proved fatal. Judging by the position of the body and the blood spatters, the attacker was about the same height as the victim. The conference room door was locked from the inside, but that did not mean it was a suicide. There was a window in the room that opened onto the hotel's courtyard. Theoretically, the killer could have left the room through the window, although that would have been risky. A broken champagne glass lay on the floor. The contents of the glass had mixed with blood, creating pinkish streaks on the carpet. There were fingerprints on the statuette, but they had yet to be analyzed. Detective Thompson began by interviewing the victim's closest relatives. The victim's family was in a state of shock, Doris Miller sobbed in her husband's arms, repeating that it must be a nightmare. Frank Miller was silent, his jaw clenched, staring into space with glassy eyes. Josephine was lying in a hotel room under the supervision of an emergency doctor. She had been given a mild sedative, but she still periodically broke into hysterics. Helena was sitting next to her, looking older than her years, and speaking in a monotone voice. "When was the last time you saw Mr. Miller?" Detective Thompson asked. "Around 10 o'clock, Helena replied. "He was dancing with one of the guests. I think it was his cousin." "Where was your husband at that time?" "He was also in the hall talking to his colleagues." "Did you notice anything strange in Mr. Miller's behavior? Was he arguing with anyone?" Helena paused before answering. "No, nothing unusual. Just a normal wedding." The detective wrote down the answers, but something about the bride's mother's behavior seemed suspicious to her. Her emotions seemed too controlled for a woman who had just lost her son-in-law on her daughter's wedding day. Joseph's interview took place in the hotel lobby. He sat in a leather armchair holding a cup of coffee brought by one of the waiters. He looked tired but calm. "Tell me about your relationship with Mr. Miller," Detective Thompson began. "The usual relationship between father-in-law and son-in-law. He made my daughter happy." "Did you approve of the marriage?" Joseph looked at her intently. What father fully approves of his only daughter's marriage? But Josie chose him, and that was enough. "Where were you between 9:30 and 10 p.m.? "In the banquet hall. Talking to guests, dancing with my wife. Who can corroborate your story?" Joseph named several people, colleagues from the construction company, neighbors, family friends. The detective wrote down all the names, planning to check the alibis later. "Do you have any idea who might have killed Mr. Miller?" "I have no idea. Brad was a popular guy. He had a lot of friends. I can't imagine who would want to harm him." Detective Thompson continued questioning until 2 in the morning. The guests' statements mostly coincided. Brad disappeared around 9:30. The whole company looked for him, and his body was found a little over an hour later. No one saw him go upstairs. No one noticed anything suspicious. Everyone's alibis were roughly the same. People were dancing, talking, drinking, having fun. In such a crowd, it's difficult to keep track of everyone's movements. Theoretically, any of the 200 guests could have gone up to the second floor, met Brad, and killed him. But not everyone had a motive. The detective began to compile a list of people who might have had reasons to kill the groom on his wedding day. The list was short. The examination showed that death occurred between 10:15 and 10:30 p.m. This was the time when the guests were actively searching for the missing groom, which created additional confusion in the witnesses' statements. By 3 o'clock in the morning, most of the guests had been released home with a warning not to leave town without notifying the police. The family remained at the hotel. Josephine was unable to drive home, and her parents did not want to leave her alone. Detective Thompson left the hotel with the feeling that this case would be more complicated than it seemed at first glance. A murder during a wedding with 200 witnesses, but no one saw anything. The victim had no obvious enemies, but there was clearly a personal motive for the murder. The statue had been struck with fury, not cold calculation. Tomorrow would bring an in-depth investigation, alibi checks, fingerprint and DNA analysis. But already she suspected that the killer was among the victim's close relatives. Sunday began for Detective Thompson at 6 in the morning with a review of the case files in the empty office of the Baker Police Station. Coffee in a plastic cup cooled on the table as she reread witness statements and studied photographs of the crime scene. Brad Miller's murder had all the hallmarks of a crime of passion. The multiple blows with the statuette spoke of the killer's uncontrollable rage. This was not a robbery or a chance encounter. Someone hated the young man very much. The analysis of the fingerprints on the murder weapon yielded its first results by noon. Clear prints belonging to Joseph Connors were found on the statuette. Technically, this could be explained by the fact that he had touched the object earlier, but when combined with other evidence, the picture began to become clearer. Detective Thompson decided to delve deeper into the Connors family history. Conversations with neighbors and colleagues painted a picture of a typical middle-class American family, but with cracks beneath the facade of prosperity. Helena Connors had been working as an administrator at State Fire Insurance for 8 years. Colleagues described her as a reserved professional woman who rarely talked about her personal life. Department head Richard Stone noted that in recent months, Helena had seemed distracted and often stayed late at work without any particular need. Joseph Connors owned the construction company, Connors Construction, which had 12 permanent employees. Business was going well. New shopping centers and residential complexes were being built in Baker. His workers described him as a fair but demanding boss. No one noticed any changes in his behavior before the wedding. Josephine Connors worked at the Baker Stars dance studio. The studio's owner, 50-year-old Barbara Davis, told the detective that the girl had been on cloud 9 for the past 6 months. She constantly talked about the upcoming wedding, her plans for a honeymoon in Florida, and what a wonderful fiancé she had. The first serious lead came during a conversation with Michael Jackson, Brad's friend and colleague at the car dealership. He told the detective that Brad had been acting strangely in recent weeks. He was saying some strange things about the Connors family, Michael said. Something about marrying the wrong woman. I thought he was just nervous about the wedding. That happens. The detective asked for more details. Brad said that Josie's mother was a very attractive woman, and that she was in an unhappy marriage. He said something about if he had met Helena earlier. Michael paused. I told him he was talking nonsense, but he insisted that there was something between them. This information made Detective Thompson reconsider the Connors family dynamics. Perhaps the murder was not related to Brad's enemies, but to a family conflict. In the afternoon, she decided to re-interview the family members, this time more specifically. Helena agreed to meet at the police station. She looked exhausted after a sleepless night, but she held herself with dignity. Mrs. Connors, I want to ask you some personal questions, the detective began. What was your relationship with Mr. Miller? Normal. I was his wife's mother. Just his wife's mother, nothing more? Helena froze, and the detective realized she had hit the mark. I don't understand what you mean. I have information that Mr. Miller showed an increased interest in you, an interest that went beyond family relations. Helena closed her eyes and was silent for a long time. Brad sometimes said inappropriate things. I tried to stop him. What exactly did he say? That he liked me, that I was in an unhappy marriage, that if we had met earlier. Helena's voice trembled. It was wrong. I was married and he married my daughter. Did your husband know about it? Helena nodded. He figured it out at the wedding. We had a fight about it. Where did this fight take place? In the conference room on the second floor. The same place where... She couldn't finish the sentence. What happened in that room? Joe accused me of being unfaithful. Brad came in and said he had married the wrong woman, that he had chosen the wrong daughter. Joe got angry. They almost came to blows. I ran out of the room. Was that the last time you saw Mr. Miller alive? Yes. The detective recorded the statement and sent Helena home. The picture of the crime was becoming clearer. All that remained was to get a confession from Joseph Connors. Joseph came to the station at 7 in the evening, at the detective's request. He looked calm, even somewhat detached, as if what was happening did not concern him. Detective Thompson decided not to play cat and mouse. Mr. Connors, your fingerprints were found on the murder weapon. Joseph's face remained impassive. I could have touched that statue before. Our company held corporate events at the hotel, perhaps. But I have your wife's testimony about what happened in the conference room before the murder. Joseph looked at the detective intently. What exactly did she say? That you caught her with Mr. Miller in a compromising situation. That there was an emotional connection between them. That you threatened him. I didn't threaten him. I told him to leave. And then... Joseph was silent for a long time. The detective could see him struggling with himself, weighing his options. He didn't leave. He said Helena had to make a choice, that she had a right to be happy. On my daughter's wedding day, he said he had married the wrong woman. And what did you do? I lost control. I grabbed the first thing I could find and hit him. I just wanted to shut him up. I didn't want to kill him. The confession was made. Detective Thompson read Joseph his rights and arrested him. By 9 p.m. on Sunday, Joseph Connors was in a holding cell on a second-degree murder charge. News of the arrest spread through Baker like wildfire. By Monday morning, the whole story was known to every resident of the town. The Connors family, which just 2 days ago had been the model of a successful American family, had become the subject of gossip and sympathy. Josephine couldn't believe her father had been arrested. She spent the whole night in tears, refusing to accept reality. Her husband was dead, her father was a murderer, her mother was involved in a love triangle. In just one day, her world had completely fallen apart. Helena took time off work and didn't leave the house. Neighbors saw her standing at the kitchen window, staring into space. She blamed herself for everything that had happened. If she hadn't succumbed to Brad's charm, if she had stopped him right away, if she hadn't let the situation go so far, Brad would be alive and Joseph would be free. Joseph's lawyer, David Cohen, who specialized in criminal cases, proposed a defense strategy based on temporary insanity. Joseph acted in a state of passion, provoked by his son-in-law's confession of love for his wife on his daughter's wedding day. Any father could have lost control in such a situation. The prosecution insisted on a second-degree murder charge. Prosecutor Janice Hartwell argued that Joseph acted deliberately and should bear full responsibility for his actions. Family circumstances do not justify murder. Joseph Connors' trial began in September and lasted 3 weeks. The trial attracted the attention of the local media. A murder at a wedding was too unusual an event for quiet Baker. Witnesses talked about what a good family the Connors were, how Joseph loved his daughter, how hard he worked for the well-being of his family. Helena testified on her husband's behalf, confirming that he had acted in the heat of the moment. Josephine refused to testify against her father. Despite her husband's death, she could not betray her only remaining parent. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The verdict was a compromise, guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The judge sentenced Joseph Connors to 12 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 8 years. On the day of sentencing, Joseph showed emotion for the first time during the entire trial. As the judge read the verdict, he cried, looking at his wife and daughter in the courtroom. The Connors family ceased to exist as it had been. Helena sold the house on Maple Street and moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of town. The construction company had to close. Without Joseph, the business quickly fell apart. Josephine was unable to return to work at the dance studio. Every day in Baker reminded her of the tragedy. 6 months after the trial, she moved to California to live with her aunt, her mother's sister, and tried to start a new life. Detective Sarah Thompson closed the Brad Miller murder case with a feeling of sadness rather than satisfaction. She had solved the crime and caught the killer, but she couldn't help but sympathize with the family who had paid such a high price for a moment of madness. In her final report, she wrote, "The case demonstrates how family secrets and repressed emotions can lead to tragedy. The murder of Brad Miller was not the result of a planned crime, but an explosion of pent-up tensions in a family that appeared perfect on the outside." 3 years later, Joseph received his first letter from his daughter in San Diego. Josephine wrote that she was working as a dance instructor at a private school and that she had a boyfriend who was helping her forget the past. She had not forgiven her father, but she no longer wanted to hate him. The story of the Connors family became a cautionary tale in Baker about the importance of telling the truth and not letting secrets destroy a family. But for those who knew them personally, it was simply a tragedy of ordinary people who made irreparable mistakes on the most important day of their lives.